All right, folks, we're going to be working on exercise 7 here in chapter 5 tonight. We had worked on the exercise number 3 in the previous week, so that one's already done. So we are trying to do exercises 3 and 7. All right, so this one says create a class that holds data about a job applicant. Include a name, phone number, and 4 Boolean fields that represent whether the applicant is skilled in each one of the following areas: word processing, spreadsheets, databases, and graphics. Okay. Include a constructor that accepts values for each of the fields. Also include a get method for each field. Create an application that instantiates several job applicant objects and pass in turn to a Boolean method that determines whether each applicant is qualified for an interview. Got all that, right? That's a lot to kind of chew on. Then in the main method, display an appropriate method for each applicant. A qualified applicant has at least 3 of the 4 skills. And so we're going to have a class file called Java applicant, and then a test program to run it. Now, if you guys remember some of the work that we've done before, this is, kind of going back to this idea of having a class file that holds the structure, the blueprint for creating an object. They have very specific stuff they want us to do with this, but it's not really that hard to create. So back here in our chapter 5 exercise folder in the project definition here, we are going to create a new class file. So let's just start with that piece. So here's the new class. We're going to call this job applicant. This is going to be non-executing. So we don't have to click the public static void main thing. This is just going to be a class file. I'm going to go ahead and click finish. And there's our blank file. Now, we were told that we do need to create data fields or properties or whatever you want to call them for name and phone number. Those to me both sound like a string. Now, you might not think that, right? So a lot of people go, well, it's a phone number. Shouldn't that be an integer? I'm like, no. Right. Because really think about how phone numbers are put together. Phone numbers are put together often with numbers, dashes, parentheses, spaces, dots. Some people do, you know what I mean? So it can be text. So I'm going to make mine a string. I think that makes the most sense. And that comes from a lot of years of programming experience too, by the way. Name is also a string. Now, one thing that we don't do a lot of, but I'm going to do it here, is you can actually declare 2 variables at once if they're the same data type. And in this case, where I'm not like pre-assigning a value, right? I can declare 2 of them at the same time, rather than say private string name, semicolon, private string phone. What's the point, right? They're both going to be blank. They're both strings. I can put them all in one line. So that's what I'm doing. Right. The other thing that I can do here is create the Boolean data fields. And we haven't really created a lot of Boolean variables, or maybe not even any so far in here. But Boolean is a data type that basically only holds true or false, right? And so the skills that they wanted us to write Boolean fields for were word processing, spreadsheet databases, and graphics. And what we're really asking is, does this person have skills with Word, or does this person have skills with a spreadsheet? Well, that kind of thing. So here's how I'm going to name my variables then. I'm going to name my variables basically in the form of a question, since they're Boolean, where the value of it answers the question. So watch what I do here. So I'm going to ask, does this person okay, that's not really good English, like has Word skill? Do they have it, true or false? Okay, so if you're following where I'm going with this, I could also do private Boolean has spreadsheet skill. Okay, the other thing your brain should tell you here is like, well, hey, if these are all the same data type, could you not have done what you did up here? And the answer is yes, I certainly could have. So I could do a comma here and then just do this, right? I could list them all at once. So it has spreadsheet skill. What are the other two? Has database skill and has graphics skill. All these are true, false, private data fields. And you see the other advantage of doing it like this is instead of like, what would it be, 6 lines of declarations, it's 2 lines of declarations. So it makes it a lot easier. All right, that part's done. What's next? 4 Boolean fields, name and phone number, we got that. Okay, include a constructor that accepts values for each of the fields. Okay, well, one task at a time, right? Smart way to proceed rather than overwhelm your brain with all the tasks at once. So when we do a constructor, the one thing that we do is it will be public because it needs to be accessible outside of here. It will be named the same thing as the class, but in the form of a function with parentheses after it. And then, of course, curly brackets the whole code. But it's telling us that we're going to pass in here all of the values. And what I did last time, and you know, I came up with unique names for them. So if you want to do it like I'm doing it, so I did a string N for name, a string P for phone, a Boolean W for word, Boolean S for spreadsheet, Boolean D for database, and Boolean, that's spell it right, G for graphics, right? And you know what? I could actually just say a name, phone, etc. But for me, this is going to be a little bit easier syntax, right? Now, in order to populate all the fields that are inside the object, we're going to use the keyword this, because which name variable are we applying it to? Well, this one, the one that you're looking at right now, right? And what are we feeding in? The name that we just passed in. And then, of course, we're going to do that with all the fields. We're going to say this phone equals P, right? And we're just going right across that list there. So this has word skill Boolean will equal H. And remember, that's going to, or that would be a W actually, right? This is going to be a Boolean value, so it's going to be true, false that's being passed. This has spreadsheet skill equals S. This dot has database skill equals D. And this dot has graphics skill equals G. All right, so now I have the constructor function complete. So in other words, when we create a job applicant from the external program, we're gonna add the name, phone, and then set all these values. You know, do they know Word? Yep. Spreadsheets? Yep. Database? Yep. Graphics? No. Right. So it'll be true, 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 false. Right. And then we send that all here, and then it creates the object. Okay. The other thing that I heard is that we need to set getters to return the values of each. And let me just go back and just confirm the instruction here. Okay, also include a get method for each field. So let's go ahead and do that. I am gonna utilize the automatic tools here, and I'm making a spot in my code where I'm hoping it will drop in. I am gonna right click right here in position. I am gonna choose source, right? We've done this a few times now, and we're gonna choose generate getters and setters, and we're not going to include, now, I don't know if you guys heard correctly, right? But it didn't say generate setters, just getters, right? So I'm going to go through each one of these fields, and I want you to notice, okay, well, with name and phone number, there's a get. So I'm just going to click on get, right? No problem. But then I'm looking at these other ones, and the ones that have the has keyword at the front, which is kind of asking a question for Booleans, the answer to it is. So is has. This is really kind of goofy syntax, but you know what it's basically indicating is it's going to be true or false, right? So this is just how we do it. And I'm just going to choose these and go with the syntax. Could I name them instead? Get has words go. Yeah, I could do that. But the convention for true false is to use is and has for whatever reason, just what we do. These are all going to be set to public because we do want them to be able to be retrieved externally from an external program. So the public modifier is checked. Once you have basically all the is's checked and then all the gets checked, click OK. All right, and then it creates all the rest of the code for you and very cleanly and elegantly, I might add. I think it looks pretty good. All right. Is there anything else that we need to put in the class file here? Well, no, this is all the class file instructions. So create the data fields, Booleans, constructor. And now we're going to create an application that instantiates. So this program is done. I'm doing a Control S to save it. What happens if I run this one? We talked about that yet? Well, nothing. It can't run. It doesn't know how to run. Right. What is it running? It's running the previous application, not the current one. Right. So that's not even the application we're running. So it really does nothing. So this won't do anything until you call upon it. That's the whole point of a class file. Right. All right. So let's build another class file then, but this one will be our application that executes. What will we call this one? I think they wanted us to call it something specific, probably like test job applicant, probably. That's kind of the pattern of this book. So we're going to say test job applicant. Right. We do want a public static void main on this one, though, because it will execute. We're going to go ahead and click finish. All right. I'm going to get rid of the pre-generated comment here. And let's start building the application now because it told us to, I think, if I remember right, to instantiate, it says several job applicant objects and pass each in turn to a Boolean method that determines whether each applicant is qualified for interview. Okay, that's a lot. Okay, so let's start with the first part of that sentence, which instantiates several job applicant objects. Okay, that we can do. So let's go back to our code and do that. So what that really means is here, we will call that external class. So job applicant, and then we're going to give it a name, so we're, and I don't know what to call them, like you could call them like, candidate or prospect or whatever, whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to call it app for applicant, right? So applicant one, for example. And then for each applicant, I'm going to do the same procedure here. I'm going to say new job applicant, right? Followed by parentheses and a semicolon. But inside here, we must send information. You notice how this is like highlighting red? So it says job applicant cannot be resolved to a type. It says create class. I wonder why. Oh, I think it's because we're not saved. Let's go ahead and save this. And then I got to check to see how did I spell applicant. Did I spell that correctly here? So it looks pretty correct to me. They are in the same folder, so it should be okay. But you notice I'm not sure that maybe I typed it right. So I'm like, why is it underlining? So this is the kind of thing that goes into your head when you're doing this. And you know what? Take a really close look at where my cursor is. And yeah, it's spelled wrong. No wonder it's underlined red. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put the L in there. Now it's going to give me a different error message. right? And this is the error message I thought it was giving me, and it wasn't. It says the constructor job applicant is undefined because back here in the class file, the constructor function that will not take it blank. You have to send the information in when you create the applicant, right? So I got to pass 6 values in, and in that exact order. So the exact order is name, phone, word skills, spreadsheet, database, and graphics, right? So Joe, phone number, 555, whatever, then true, false, false, true, for example, right? So that's what we have to do in the other program. So let's do it. Let's see if the error goes away. So as a name, you can have a first and a last name if you want. So you can call it, I don't know, John Smith, followed by comma, separate piece of information. And then the phone number, I'm just going to do a goofy one, like 123, 123, 1234. Another comma after the double quote, and then a series of true false responses. So I'm just going to do true, true, false, false. Okay, so in other words, yes, they have word skills. Yes, they have Excel skills. No, they don't know databases, and no, they don't know graphics, right? So this guy's not going to get interviewed, right? Because he's only checking 3 boxes where he should check at least 3, if you remember the instruction, right? So we're going to do another job applicant, and rather than kind of like retype all of that, I am going to go ahead at this point and just change the applicant number, then change the information. So come up with a different name. So I'm going to say Jane, Jane Jones. That's kind of a bad name. Let's give her a different, kind of random kind of phone number here. And let's change these values too. So let's say that Jane checks all the boxes. So all of these for her will be true. We're going to paste another one. So we should do this. It's said several times, right? So I'm going to do it like 4 times, I think. So let's just go ahead and create those. So I got a 3 and I got a 4, and then, come up with whatever names you want. So let's have some fun with it, and let's put Donald Trump in there, and Joe Biden. And you know what? I'm not really caring too much about the the phone numbers, but maybe we can change these up a little bit. So they don't all have the same values, right? To just mix them up a little bit. Okay. So there's our 4 job applicants. So these commands will create 4 job applicant objects, right? Now we're going to have a couple of messages that are going to pop up. A person's either going to be qualified or not qualified. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create 2 string variables where I'm going to store the messages, the default messages. So I'm going to have one string called qualified message, and it's just going to say is qualified for an interview. And for some reason, I have a bunch of blanks here. I'm not sure why, but there was a reason. We'll figure it out when we run it. And then another string variable, not qualified message, which says is not qualified for an interview at this time. Okay, so those are our default error messages, right? Now, if we are going to run this, and this is where it gets a little bit weird, we're going to ask a question, right? And I want you, and this is all about kind of like Boolean logic here. It told us in the instructions, and this is, devil's in the details, right? Create an application, instantiate several job applicant objects. That's the 4 lines of code we just wrote. And then string messages, well, that's an extra. And pass each in turn to a Boolean method that determines whether each applicant is qualified for an interview. So what I'm hearing next is we need to create a Boolean method. Okay, so that's a function that's going to return a Boolean value. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to do that. So notice how I have the main method here, right? That's inside a set of curly brackets, right? Then we have a closing curly bracket. I want to put my code here before that closing curly bracket. So right here at the bottom, I'm going to build a new function. This is going to be public, so we can call it externally if we wish. Static, because it's, let's call it unchanging in memory. That's probably about all you need to worry about right now. It's all about like reference types and memory storage and stuff, but static, it's not going to change in memory. All right. We are going to return a Boolean value. So we're going to return true or false back to the program because that's what we need to know. Is the person qualified or not? True or false? Simple question. So we're going to call the function. Now, watch the syntax here. We're starting with the keyword is, right? It's not a keyword, but we're starting with the naming convention of is, which implies that we're asking a question of true, false, and therefore expecting a true, false response. So is the person qualified? So is qualified, kind of like a question. So parentheses and then curly brackets, but inside the parentheses, we got to check the applicant. So in other words, to check to see if the applicant is qualified, instead of passing in like a string or an integer or even a Boolean, we're going to pass in the entire job applicant object. So the whole thing with it, all its data fields, all its functions, all its constructors, all of its stuff is going to go in there. And you know what? We're going to come up with a generic variable name for it here. We're just going to call it app for applicant, right? Now we need to run some code in here, right? So we are going to basically set a value that we're going to return that is going to be the true or false. I'm going to pre-create it here at the very top of this, and I'm going to call it is qual. It's qualified, right? And I'm going to preset it to false. So we're going to assume that they're not qualified to begin with. We got to prove that they're qualified. We're not going to assume that they're qualified. So I set it to true and then interview a bunch of people we don't want to interview. We just want to interview the ones that are, but first we have to do some checks. The other thing that we're going to check here is I'm going to set a constant that's an integer that I'm going to call minimum skills. So we were told from the instructions that they have to have at a minimum 3 of the 4 skills, right? And so we're going to count those skills one at a time. So I'm going to set up a counter variable too. Actually, that has to be an int. And we'll call it count, and we'll preset that to 0 for starters. Now, when I check my count and check my skills, I'm going to refer to them by name rather than by number, right? And this is really considered a good practice. So if I want to check this now, is the applicant qualified? I'm going to write a bunch of if statements. I'm going to say if the applicant, so here's that weird syntax, has word skill, right? So if this is true, so what this is going to do now, think about this. This is going to take the applicant object that we're passing in. It's going to look inside of its structure and go, hey, do you have a thing called has word skill? Oh yeah, there it is, right? Is that true or false? Right? Return that value. That's basically what we're doing. So I'm trying to get back to, there we go. I'm going to go here. So that's going to return a true or false. And then if it's true, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to add 1 to our count of skills, right? So we're going to plus equals 1 to the count. Then we're going to go through, we're going to ask the same thing about all of those, by the way. So then just to shortcut things here a little bit, I'm going to paste in the rest of them. So here's the spreadsheet. So is has spreadsheet, is has database, is has graphics. And if they check true on any one of those, they add 1 to the count. Now, the goal, of course, is to get the count up to 3 so that you qualify. All right, so there's my if statements. Notice no else's on these, right? These are exclusive If they don't have it, they don't have it. There's no else, right? So just a single if. All right. Next thing that we want to check now that we've done all that determining is if the count of the number of skills is greater than or equal to the minimum skills required, which is 3, then what's going to happen, right? So then we're going to run a snippet of code, and the code will basically do this. We're just going to set this Boolean value from false to true. So we're going to say is qual equals true. All right. Well, if there is an else here, right? So if they're not qualified, well, they're not qualified. We're not going to change it to false, or do we? You know what? I mean, so here's where it gets a little weird. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say is qual equals false, but in reality, do I need to do that? No, I could skip this part of it, right? Because it's only going to trip is qualified if the count is higher. If it's not, it's already set to false, right? So I can actually delete that, right? So if your brain is thinking like that. Now we're all done with processing the logic. And then what's left here is we're stating not void in this spot, but Boolean, which means we're returning a Boolean. What are we going to return? We're going to return is qual and whatever it is. I'm just going to say return is qual, which is qualified. So hopefully true, but we don't know. So this is the function that will process all the job applicants. Now we need to send those job applicants here, right? All right, so now up in the main program body, I'm going to write another method. And now we're going to have it basically display the output. Now I'm thinking about this. Now, if it comes back true, I'm going to display the qualified message. If it comes back false, I'll display the not qualified message, right? And so I can kind of actually pre-build my output statement, right? And you know what? I'm going to just create it as a method. Why, so here's the kind of thinking I want you to get into is I could just write a system out print line here because it is only going to be one line of code. Okay, granted. But maybe your output is a lot more complicated. So what if I just call the display method and I'm going to send to it information. And what information would I send to it? Well, I would send the job applicant and whether or not, or one of the two messages up here of qualified or not qualified. So follow my line of thinking here. So basically, every time I call here, I'm going to be sending in whoever the applicant is, and in either a qualified message or non-qualified message, right? But how do I know if they're qualified or not? Okay. Well, first of all, this whole thing, this like function I'm calling here kind of randomly on the fly, it doesn't exist. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to create display empty parentheses semicolon, then I'm just going to let Excel do the work for me. Not Excel, excuse me, Eclipse. Boy, talking spreadsheets, so not I'm mixing up my words. But we're going to let Eclipse do the work for us, and we're just going to go ahead and create that method of display. What that method will look like will be a system out print line, but more importantly, I do want to send two pieces of information in. So the one would be a job applicant object, and we'll use the same naming we did before. We'll just call them app, right? And then also the message, the is or is not qualified message, and I'll just call that MSG. That's what we're passing in. In the output statement, I'm going to kind of do it like this. Yes, I'm pasting it all in at once, by the way. So I'm going to do my system out print line, but that's going to take the applicant that we passed in. It's going to go back into the object, pull the name out, create a space, whether or not it's qualified, and then space and the phone number and the space, and then go into the object and pull the phone number, right? So what's the thinking there? This person's qualified, this person is not. You're going to call them up and say, hey, I'm sorry, but I'm sorry, but you got the job, that kind of thing. So what that means up here is we're going to get into the habit of passing in an applicant, maybe applicant one, for example, and then maybe a qualified message, hopefully, right? Something like that. But how do I know if the person's qualified or not? Well, you know what? We got to ask another question, because we just returned the result from the Boolean thing, but we're never calling this Boolean method. So here, this will be the general form of what we push out there, but I'm going to comment that out for the moment. So I'll use that as my pattern, I guess. But first I have to write some if statements. And what I have to do is for each one of the job applicants. So I'm going to go if is qualified. Now, keep in mind, is qualified is our own internal function that I'm sending the first job applicant to, like that, right? And then what's going to happen is if that comes back true, they get three trues, right? Then I'm going to run the display function just like this. So that's why I put it here, right? So I kind of wrote it in advance, and now I'm going to paste it in. So the first applicant will get the qualified message. If they're not qualified, else, right? Then we'll say display, but we'll say not qualified message. So if they're qualified, to get the right message. If they're not qualified, to get the other message. You know what? We have 3 other job applicants. We're going to run that code again. Now, I know that some of you are thinking, well, hey, we just learned about loops. Could we put this in a loop? Yes, the answer is absolutely yes. But I don't want to do that right now. I'm focusing on the if statements, if you will, right? So we're making these decisions. Now, this is going to be a repeating process, right? And what I would normally do when I write an if statement is I would leave spaces in between all of them like this, right? Then all I'm going to do here is I'm going to change which applicant I'm sending in. So this one's going to be 2. This one's going to be 3. This one's going to be 4. Like so. So once again, a bunch of if statements. And just keep in mind the way these operate is it asks a question or makes a statement that evaluates to true, false. If true, we do what's in the first set of curly brackets. If not, there's no additional checking happening here. We're just doing it, right? So just keep that concept in mind. There's a couple of alternate ways we could write this, and and I don't want to go super deep into that rabbit hole right now, but let's just say for whatever reason we have another job applicant here, and I just want to show you a different format that you might consider using. And so let's replicate this guy here. Let's call it app 5, and I don't know who you want to put in here, and their phone number, of course, is something like that. And of course, they have all the skills, right? Aliens, right? But what I'm going to do here with that last applicant, and this is kind of a weird approach, but we're going to learn about what we call a ternary if statement. And I talk about this in the book, and they kind of very briefly demonstrate it. But basically, when we ask an if question, and it's really simplistic, right? So there's only like really one action or other that happens. They came up with this alternate way of doing this, and just kind of watch what I'm doing here. I'm going to say, I'm going to call is qualified. I'm going to pass in applicant 5, spelled correctly here, app 5. And then the way that these ternary if statements work is you put in a question mark, which represents the if, and then whatever your, okay, so I'm going to backtrack here a second. So the first part of the statement before the question mark is your true false test, right? Then if that's true, what are you going to do? Well, we're going to do the same thing we were doing here. We're just going to do it with applicant 5. Right? So you see the approach. Now, I'm not including the semicolon because that would terminate the statement. And then we put in a colon for the else, right? And that, once again, it's only a single statement. This does need to be changed to app 5. So we'll get the not qualified message here, put it on the other side. We'll say app 5, and then put in our semicolon at the end. So I want you to take a look at the structure of this and how it works. And it doesn't seem to be liking it a lot, and I'm not really quite sure why, but I guess we'll figure that out. And it says change the type of app 5. Oh, I see, right, because it can't return. Okay, so this is, I'm trying to show you a technique that isn't quite working, because this needs to be running it and returning a true false in the spot. And that should actually work. I'm not really sure why it doesn't. Did I misspell this? Is qualified? Oh, right, because it needs a spot to put this. So here's how we would do this. And I apologize because this is a little watered down, not a great example of what I'm really trying to do here. But I need a place to put the true false value. So I would actually declare, you guys can follow what I'm doing here. This is not an elegant example, and I apologize. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a Boolean, I don't know what to call it, qual, right? And then set it to the result of that app, that running. So let me just get up here. And I probably shouldn't have added this here. I think it's confusing you guys probably more than helping. And I'm sorry for that. Some of you might feel where I'm going with this, right? So we call this with that applicant, it comes back true, false, and we're going to put that there. And then I'm just going to check that value, right? So that's a true, false. And see, that should fix the mistake, but it's not doing it. So, all right, from void to Boolean. Okay. All right, you know what? I'm scrap that example, and I apologize that I even recorded it into the video. I'll see if I can edit it out. Let's not worry about applicant 5 right now. So we're just going to delete applicant 5. Never got his, his commute is too far anyhow, so he's just not going to make it to work. All right, let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. I'm going to clean up my code here a little bit, just tighten things up just ever so slightly. Not have so many lines spread apart. But if you guys need all the code, there's the first part. There's the second part, and the program. All right, let's try to run this and see if it works. Control S to save. Here comes the run. All right, let's see what it says down here. So John Smith is not qualified. Phone number. Jane Jones is qualified. Donald Trump is qualified, and so is Joe Biden. Okay, according to the way that we set that up. All right, quick question. How'd you guys do? Okay? You guys okay on this? Still working to get the code in? Right, that's what I'm going to assume right now. Everybody's being very quiet. That's fine. But that is the solution for this one. I will do a different example on the ternary statement. That wasn't a very elegant example. And then I had other complications with the, the if and else part of it. I was trying to put too much in there and doing it very hastily. Okay, so we'll leave that aside, but I will do a separate example on that one. So this is the solution for exercise number 7 from chapter 5. All right, and this video will end here.